Today we prove that we are much stronger than anything that has tried to move us to halt. Too long we have asked and waited for others to move for us, make room for us, give us our due. Time and time again we have been denied the space to tell our stories, to be our stories. And when the illusion of space was granted, we were so often tokenized. We are no longer in the business of asking that our work, that our lives be valued. We are telling you they must be. We are no longer begging for permission to exist. One need not ask for permission to live, breathe, and create in their own home. And here we are, at home. We are not just our ancestors' hopes realized. We are the reality they deserved in waking. Not just something to look forward to, but something to be seized in the here and now. The young, black, and radical of today become the grounded wisdom givers of tomorrow. And the seeds we plant in our own soil will bear fruit the likes of which many of us have never seen, but have always deserved. Whether your black is sharp, or wounded, or meandering, or wayward, all will be welcomed home in a neighborhood built by us and for us. Today is, just as much as tomorrow was, and the days to come after that will be, a great day in the Mound.
Here to discuss how local arts can create opportunity, please welcome Jamie Bennett, Executive Director of ArtPlace America, and Victoria Jones, Executive Director of the Collective. Here to lead the conversation, please welcome back Ray Suarez.
They like you.
They do.
Now, in the history, the recent history of the arts, the creative output of a people, of a place, is a leverageable asset. It's an economic factor in the life of a place. But like anything else in urban planning and development, it can be done well or it can be done badly. When you come to conferences like this one, it's often asserted in complete confidence, like absolutely no talkback, that the arts are not only a good investment, but one with multiplier effects that rival other kinds of investment. How does that work? In a city like Memphis, whose geography, whose human capital made it the home of great American art forms, how can the arts be used to develop human capital and contribute to the economic health of a city? And where does the money come from to fuel initiatives, and not just things that sprout up and then dry up, but are still here in 5 years, in 10 years? To discuss those and other issues, I have two excellent panelists. What did we just see in that video, Victoria?
So that was the actual promo for our new space we just opened up in Orange Mound on January 11th. And I think it was us trying to champion a space that was created for Black people in mind, because I think a lot of spaces that show up in Memphis aren't necessarily created with us at the table, with us in mind. And so the video, we wanted to not just say we're opening a gallery and a co-work space, but we're opening a space for us.
And in the life of a neighborhood, what difference does it make for the collective to be there?
So we actually thought about a whole host of neighborhoods before we landed in Orange Mound, but there's a legacy and a historical value that exists in this neighborhood that doesn't exist in any other neighborhood in the city. And it's founded for and by Black people, and it made sense for us to try to exist in the thread of the magic that already is Orange Mound.
And tell us more, what is the collective, really? Are you...
Yeah,
what are
that
you?
makes sense. I ask myself that every day. Let me say with certainty, we are an Black art organization working on creating space for Black artists in the city and hoping to use their creative expression to uplift Black communities. And if we do those things together, we're hoping to shift the culture of Memphis.
And when you say artists, is that broad or narrow? Or
as broad as you can make it, like from the typical, like visual artists, photographers, to carpenters, to performing artists, to musicians, really trying to create space for people who are creating any kind of cultural bearing.
Well, Jamie, ArtPlace America has invested millions over the years in local communities. When you say creative placemaking, what does that mean? And what does it look like when it's done right?
Yeah, so that phrase creative placemaking is one that people hear differently, I think, depending on the background they bring to it. So sitting next to my bed is my copy of Jane Jacobs' The Death and Life of Great American Cities, right? So I know that placemaking is equitable community development that begins with the resident. It's people first. It's holistic, right? It doesn't work in silos. And it's locally informed. It doesn't look the same in Memphis as it does in Little Rock, as it does in Jackson, Mississippi. And all we're trying to do with the creative is to invite artists to join their neighbors in making those sort of communities. But the problem is that many more people have read a book by Richard Florida called The Rise of the Creative Class, right? And I'm going to do a disservice, and I know I'm doing this on sort of Atlantic's territory, but the original framing of that is that the creative class were the 100 shiny, happy people that any mayor should care about. The mayors competed to get that many people to move to their community, and whichever mayor did that was declared the winner, and as her reward, she got a Starbucks, a bike share, and a couple of gay people, right? And that's not the kind of work that we're investing in. We're looking at how do we lift up the culture, that which connects us as people, to make sure that those of us who live in a place are able to hold space and bring in the future that we want to see.
Now, I don't want to sound shallow, but sometimes in the interest of moving a conversation along, the moderator has to sound a little shallow. When those things start to happen that you just sort of dismissed, the couple of gay people, the bike share, a coffee shop, doesn't have to be a Starbucks. It looks like something is happening.
Sure.
And often all that it takes for more investment to cluster in around a place is for it to look like something's happening. This is a game of perceptions, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. But I think the question we need to ask is who are the we that are benefiting from that, right? So a lot of folks have used the word gentrification from the stage today. I've actually stopped using that word gentrification, and we've started talking about displacement, and we've started talking about the different kinds of displacement that happen, right? So we're all familiar with the physical displacement that can happen when eminent domain is used to remove people from a neighborhood. We all have examples of economic displacement when property values go up, but my income doesn't, so I can't afford the property taxes, I can't afford to stay there. But I think the kind of displacement that we need to talk more about is cultural displacement, right? People are very good at understanding for whom spaces are intended. Yep. So I live in New York City. We have something called the High Line. People love talking about it's this free, wonderful open space. It's got elevators. There are literally no barriers to access. But I can't get water on the High Line for less than $8, right? So I know that that's a space that's intended for people who have $8 for a bottle of water, right? In Echo Park, Los Angeles, the city just invested in a major new space. That neighborhood is something like 93% Spanish speaking. The new neighborhood was developed with zero signage in Spanish. For whom was that neighborhood intended? So I think the kind of work that the Collective is doing, the fact that the Collective is holding space in that neighborhood as a sort of gateway to welcome folks in, shows that this is a neighborhood that is welcoming and who the us is that we're looking for the investment to follow.
A lot of the neighborhoods where arts have, planted their flag, moved into underutilized physical capital, the people who are already there sometimes wonder what the value proposition is, because there are a lot of needs in those places. Is it better for us to have a pharmacy or a clinic or a school or a store or something else? What am I getting out of an art project, an art incubator being here that not only proves itself over time, but allows you to look directly at the neighborhood and say, here's why we're here, here's what we bring. We're an asset like those other things you're naming that you also need.
I think for us, it hasn't necessarily been a convincing folks that they need art. I think in Black communities, what I see art do is serve as hope in the interim. So we're waiting on better books, better school systems, better economic like all the things we're waiting on. But what people are doing in the meantime to continue to hope for something better is singing, is dancing, is painting. Like they're holding on to that. And so I think for us, we also are very convinced like everyone has a lane. Our lane is to kind of create that space for people to continue to hope and to create a tribe. Like I think art and sports do that really well, create tribes around a thing. And so if we can create space for people to come and be hopeful for 2 hours out of the day, when there aren't books, when we can't create the store or the better school or the what, like that means a lot to those folks. And so we've had people, our grand opening, the day the entire parking lot was full, folks had to park across the street and other parking lots. And we had a current resident come up to us with tears in her eyes, like, I haven't seen it look like this since the 70s. So people are, one, happy to see folks who look like them investing in neighborhoods that reflect them, but then also happy to see something that's providing hope, again, in that where it might not be a pharmacy yet, and the Save-A-Lot's still there, and we wish the Kroger hadn't closed. So we've been able to see what that does. And that's not to say that we don't want those things to happen either. Because I think sometimes,
exactly.
right?
I mean, it's a false, I don't want to set up a false choice, but often these are neighborhoods of high need where a lot of these things should be happening anyway. And
Yeah,
they're
for
not.
sure. And so I think it's what we've been able to see, again, is in our lane, we're able to do this work. We're able to create some hope while we're maybe waiting on the city to do something, right?
If that's healthy, though, does it help create an atmosphere where those other things feel more welcomed, feel safer, feel like there's good things happening that make them want to be there?
I would hope so. But I think that's a safer, all those words are kind of hard for me to process in the space. Is like, I think
It's a short panel. I know,
I know,
there are
I'm
better,
sorry, I'm
I know there are better words, but I don't want to get into that conversation.
I got you. But I think we can't, without doing that, for us, it's our first domino. So that it doesn't stop with a gallery. We're trying to figure out how to transition that shopping center into a corridor that does provide those other offerings. It did take us existing there first to prove that it's worth investing in and that people will show up. I think there was a thought that we don't care about this stuff, but like our grand opening was like really hardcore proof that people want to exist in this strip, people want to be invested in, they will show up if you care about them.
Just to clarify, I didn't mean physical safety. I meant that all investment involves risk, so that risk capital feels safer when you're not the only inhabited building on the block, let's say,
For sure.
for argument's sake.
Yeah.
How do you keep it, Jamie, close to the ground, involved with the people who live there, rather than art, as often happens in the development of art districts and so on, becoming an elite experience?
Yeah, and I think, that's a huge question. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that when we say arts and culture, oftentimes in panels like this, we're talking about the arts and culture that's mediated by nonprofits and by philanthropy. We're not talking about the full spectrum of music and dance and literature that we're talking about. And we have to think about the infrastructure that supports nonprofits, right? If I was a foreign government and I came to the State Department and I said, our country has a form of representational democracy, and our form of representational democracy is that 3 rich people in perpetuity will pick their descendants who will control things, right? They would be laughed out of the State Department. But that's a form of representational democracy that we have with nonprofits, right? 3 people start a nonprofit and they pick their successors, but that group of people is meant to represent the public. So what would it look like if we had a truer democratic process in the governance of our nonprofits and in our philanthropies?
But does it also involve revenue models that make you, at least down the road, less dependent on the kindness of strangers, less dependent on foundation money, less dependent on family charities, and able to pay your own rent and keep your own lights on?
Yes, and in order to have that conversation, we have to talk about the at least 400-year history in this country of individual wealth, right? And one of the sort of issues, I spent a year of my life doing some work with symphony orchestras, for instance. And symphony orchestras are desperate to change the demographics of who's on stage and who's in the audience, right? I think that's the exact wrong conversation, because symphony orchestras are culturally specific organizations. None of us are worried that too many people of Japanese heritage are participating in taiko drumming organizations. We represent them, we recognize those as culturally specific. Symphony orchestras are dedicated to the musical tradition, the musical history of Western Europe. So we need to recognize that they're culturally specific, and then we need to fund them in the same way we fund all culturally specific.
But isn't part of the conceit that while in origin, to use the example of a symphony orchestra, yes, the repertoire, the style is European derived, but it's meant to be something that's enjoyed, played, understood, loved by all kinds of people. Because if you're looking down the road at a country that in 2045 has a majority population that was born, that traces its heritage to Africa, Asia, and Latin America, rather than Europe, which is where we're at as a country, mid-2040s at some time, that happens. You're also saying, well, someday we're just not going to have as many symphony orchestras, and that's that. Because it's where you're...
Right? That doesn't sound so bad.
I mean, where are the foundations that are investing in integrating taiko drumming, right? They don't do that because European supremacy tells us that we all should love symphonic music. That's music. And everything else is an elective, right? So I love symphony orchestras. I spent 2 years working at the New York Philharmonic. But we've got way more symphony orchestras in this country holding way more real estate than we need.
Financially.
So what would it look like if Avery Fisher Hall held space for the New York Philharmonic and taiko drumming and jazz at Lincoln Center and all of the other musical traditions that make up this country?
Yep.
In that world, how do you live into that world with an organization like the Collective, where the demographics are in flux, the money's in flux, what things are gonna be like in 2025 and 2030 is all in flux?
Yeah. I think, so in the kind of art nonprofit world, I guess, what we've been witnessing is lion's share going to ballet, orchestra, opera. And so we're young, we're Black, and that is going to be its own risky thing for certain folks for certain reasons. But I think what we're hoping is to, what you were kind of saying earlier, like get away from waiting on an old rich white man to give us some money, because it's not likely at this, like not in the ways that they're giving to folks who reflect them. So what we have been able to do is find creative ways. And I think that's like Memphis' story right now too, like Black artists, Black folks in general, making ways out of no ways. And so there is a large group of people who believe in this mission. They're financially giving. There are people who believe in the work, and they're finding ways for us to partner with them. Contracts, doing whether it's like equity work in different organizations, or like just curating an exhibition, but just finding different ways than relying on the powers that be, because the powers that be have been that because of slavery and economics, all the things, right? And so trying to figure out how we can step as far away from that as possible, because we're not going to be a ballet and we're not going to be an orchestra. And I think as long as folks are still pouring that money into these, like especially in Memphis, it's like close to 70% Black. Like, if your entire audience has like 2% Black people in a Black, really, really Black city, and you're still getting the lion's share of the funding here, it literally makes no sense. And when you're talking about influx and 2025, like all these things, like by then it's like certainly won't make sense. We're still like trying to make it make sense, and it's just, I don't know. That's always, the funding conversation is an interesting one for me, but I think I always encourage folks to just make a way. It's not gonna be as shiny and as new. Our space, we have leaks, we have this, whatever, but like it is our space, and it's not going to be crossed down because we aren't white.
The worries about money, can you navigate those while still keeping the art risky and fresh and forward-leaning? Because the pressure might be to play it safe if you're worried about next year's money and the fiscal 21 money and so on. There's a lot of pressure to keep it safe and keep it popular and so on.
Not for us. I think, well, because we've been having to make our own way. My board chair sitting right here, Rachel Knox, has actually asked me, like, hold on, calm down. Like, but that's just not, the folks who fall, like, that we are serving don't want that. They don't want us to be safe. They want us to keep stepping on people's necks, and so we try to do that. And I think in that space, we get this, like, real kind of organic trust, and then we're able to, I'm looking at the clock and that just freaked me out. Like, able to like move through.
I'll worry about it.
But able to kind of do honest work based off of that. And I think honestly, our communities know when we're being tokenized and when we're limiting ourselves. We've had folks ask us like, why would you partner with them? You know, they don't care about us. And so we've had to be honest and realistic about how we move in spaces and being like coming in our full selves, in our truth, and figuring it out. We had to scramble to figure out rent last month, but that's just a part of it. And it's not, at no point will I ask an artist not to talk about Loeb and its problematic history, so.
You have to assess, Jamie. I mean, people are asking you for money all the time. What's in a pitch that makes you realize these people have thought about some of these hard equity questions about the art, about the placemaking, so on?
Yeah, so we often borrow from a group called Policy Link, which I'm sure many folks here know, who say that the three questions to always ask are who decides, who pays, and who benefits. And I think having transparency around those three questions often get you to have a shared understanding of what the project will actually do, what it's intended to do. Someone earlier today said, we don't live in a country with broken systems. We live in a country where the systems work exactly as they're intended to. So I think bringing transparency to what is my theory of change. Is my theory of change that I'm going to change the economic conditions of a neighborhood by changing who lives there? Or am I going to change the economic conditions by creating the opportunity and delivering to the people who've been living there for generations what they've been entitled to? So I think transparency around who pays, who decides, and who benefits is a really good starting point.
Can you give us an example of a project where the right answers to those questions beautifully came together for you and you put some money down?
Sure. So one of the projects we love talking about is in Washington, D.C. And there's a new linear park that's being created called the 11th Street Bridge. And it was started by an extraordinary man called Scott Kratz, who came to this project sort of not knowing what was impossible. And so people told him what an equitable project should look like, and he's doing it. So he's actually worked with the Urban Institute to create a set of metrics that hold themselves accountable to, are they creating equitable development in that neighborhood? And the 11th Street Bridge, I should say, connects Capitol Hill to east of the river, to Ward 7 and Ward 8 in Anacostia, so one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in DC, with one of the least affluent neighborhoods. And they've had extraordinary success because they've met with people. I think they've had something like 600 community meetings on both sides of the river, and they're now investing more money outside their boundary line of their project than they are in the project itself. So they're investing in a home buying club. They're investing in savings accounts for children to go to school because they know the change that is coming. So it's their job to equip the residents to benefit from the change that's coming, not to have to run from it.
Quick question before we close. Victoria, how can you tell, as a leader, that the things you're doing are working? How do you know?
Wow. Okay. I think it comes up in a few different ways. I watch the people that I work with show up differently than when they showed up in the beginning. I think our work, there's like the savior complex where you're coming in to save a group of people, but like, no, the people who are doing this work are the people that will be benefiting the work. And so I've gotten to watch them show up and be inspired and complete projects and quit their jobs, become artists, like do this work full time, but also like watch folks transition from I take pictures, I paint, to I am an artist, I'm a photographer, and that kind of stuff. But then on the community side, relationships are being built, organizations are being started, and I'm watching people roll up their sleeves to do the work that they were, in other conversations, people are waiting, like, I wish the streets weren't so dirty. These folks are literally rolling their sleeves up and picking up trash and like literally doing the work. And we watched that kind of happen over and over and over. And then watching young people get inspired and like wanting to find out how to get involved, like all those things. It's interesting because that's not my field. I like art and I like Black people. Nonprofit stuff is very still misty to me. And so it's like trying to figure out how to like explain, like, I am watching Black people have hope. I don't know how to put that in a grant application. It is a very, very spiritual experience to like see that happen. And that watching people hope. It is a very true experience, but it's a very hard one to explain.
You'd take that on a grant application, wouldn't you?
I mean, no, because I absolutely would, because I think our field is way too obsessed with indicators, and we need to get comfortable with indications, right? If you showed me a 30-second video of your opening of the space, it would be clear to me what that project is, and Dianu, that's enough.
Jamie Bennett and Victoria Jones, please thank you.